As I'm sure you know by now, early this morning, our time, there was a terrorist attack in New York and in Washington, D.C.
Called me this morning at 8:56 a.m. from the 101st floor to tell me that there was smoke in the room.
I'm the director of neurosurgery at one of our trauma hospitals, and I know what's going on right there, right now.
My first reaction was, as a Muslim, hey, this is retribution.
There are people in the world today, right this moment, who are celebrating at their success of pulling off an amazing logistical nightmare.
Muslims feel, hey, listen, you came into my home, took, my home, and you kicked me out.
Neither I nor anybody I know was ever raised with the concept of being a suicide bomber.
And then you give back, like, a little bathroom to me, and I'm supposed to celebrate, and when I'm not celebrating, you come and kick my ass?
A real warrior, not a thug who calls himself a warrior so he can feel better about himself. A thug is out just to create violence. Do it again.
And it's all here in your heart, too. So if you kill, you're killing a part of yourself.
On September 11, 2001, as the towers burned in New York, all over the country, children were looking up at their parents or their teachers for guidance. College students were arguing with each other and with their professors. People went to work and hoped that the manager, the CEO, or the president of the company would have words of guidance. Everyone heard the president promising retaliation. Anthony Robbins was asleep in Hawaii when the towers were hit. That day was to be the second day of a conference on leadership that he was teaching to 2,000 participants from 40 countries, with about 100 New Yorkers, many of whom had lost family, friends, and entire businesses that morning. For a moment, Robbins considered canceling the event, but he reconsidered. When evil happens, for life to make sense, some good must come from that evil. When tragedy strikes, if life is to have meaning, some good must result from the tragedy. This film is a condensed version of the day's events, demonstrating how to create leaders in times of crisis and how to define metaframes where violence is not possible. One thing that is certain is that there will be times of pain, suffering, and crisis in everyone's life. It is my hope that this film will give you some tools to bring out the best in yourself and in others at those times. Since dawn, participants had been crying, screaming, and fighting with each other. Their reaction reflected the diversity of reactions taking place around the world. In New York, some had an immediate emotional reaction to the tragedy. Others were shocked and unresponsive. Some people were terrorized and fled the city. While others immediately headed towards the disaster scene in order to help. Around the world, some people reacted with anger and focused on revenge. Others demonstrated in the streets, some as a show of support for the victims, others as a dance of victory. Most people felt the attacks to be a sharp interruption of life as they knew it, and many saw the tragic events as the end of an era. The subject scheduled for the conference that day had originally been emotional mastery, how each individual has the capacity to choose the emotions to be experienced. Robbins decided to preserve the theme of emotional mastery while focusing on the day's tragic events. The film is a condensed version of the 10-hour day, where Robbins begins with large group interventions, moves to working with small groups, then to individuals, until he focuses on two men, a New York Jew and a Pakistani who stood up to represent the Muslim point of view. Through indirect negotiation, Robbins transforms the young Muslim into an activist for peace, and in so doing, he unifies the large group's emotional experience in the direction of growth and contribution. The attack on the towers on September 11 was the trigger for many of the conflicts that face the world today. This film is about how to create peace, and is a contribution to the understanding of the emotions of those who are in a position to negotiate for peace. Facing the challenge of how to create an empowering meaning that would unify and serve the large group, Robbins decided to restructure the day's teachings into 5 parts. He began by redefining the situation with the purpose of developing leadership. Next, he created a sense of community by appealing to higher common values. Third, the participants were invited to re-examine and analyze their initial emotional reactions to the news. And fourth, to discuss them with each other. Finally, a process of indirect negotiation between two men who occupied opposite poles of belief served to integrate the diversity of views represented in the room.
As I'm sure you know by now, early this morning, our time, there was a terrorist attack in New York and in Washington, D.C., and 4 airplanes were hijacked. The airplanes were leaving for the West Coast, and they hit to the World Trade Centers and hit both towers, and they imploded and were destroyed, and probably 10 to 20,000 people probably died in the process. And there's a great deal of horror, as you can imagine, there, and people working very hard to salvage any human life that's still there in that situation. A lot of other people who witnessed the experience of horror. A lot of people in this room who probably have family members there with concerns. It's very difficult to communicate based on the phone lines. And then in Washington, D.C., the Pentagon was hit, and there's been a great destruction there. And then there was another plane that landed outside of Pennsylvania. So this is emotional mastery. And so it's an opportunity for us to figure out, how do you focus on? What do you focus on? What does this mean? What do you do? And from a leadership perspective, I think the first focus has to be who needs to be served and cared for. And so the first focus is who is directly affected by this. And there are people in this room who are directly affected by this, and I think everyone here's hearts go out to you, and our love is there for you, but more than just our love, we want to do everything we can to support you personally. So the experience that's happening right now is radically different for everyone here. Radically different. Some people are saying, what are you upset about? This stuff happens in my country every day. Maybe not as dramatically, in some cases more dramatically. Some people are angry and they want to attack somebody. Some people are going to look at the Islam culture in a very ugly way, when it's not a culture that's generated this, it's not a people that's generated this, it's a few individuals that have made some choices, and they're going to be in a different point of view. There's all kinds of things to focus on. There's all kinds of meanings which will create emotions, and there's all kinds of actions. I think as leaders, our responsibility, 1, is focus on who we can help. 2 is to find an empowering meaning in anything life gives you. If you don't find an empowering meaning, then what you're really doing is indulging, especially if it doesn't affect you directly. Now, I'm not talking about somebody who lives in that community, because if it was your hometown and somebody came in and blew up a building, you start to look at it differently. But 6 million people died in Africa recently, and most people didn't give a shit. My belief is simple. I believe 3 things. Number 1, in life, you got to see things as it is, but not worse than it is. And if you see it worse than it is, you're doing that to connect with yourself. You're doing that to connect with other people. You're doing that as a drama queen or king. But also, you don't want to not see it as it is. You don't want to pretend like nothing happened, because that's bullshit. This is a severe strike, and it certainly affects the psychology and the certainty and the caring and the emotions and the fears of people living in this nation and other nations too, who use this as a model of maybe where certainty or security may be. But you don't want to make it worse than it is. Second is, you got to see it better than it is, because if you don't see it better than it is, you're not a leader. Because if you don't see it better than it is, with no compelling future, then what people do is just sit around. And the third thing is, when you see it better than it is, you got to do something to make it better. At some level, no matter how small it is, every small action helps to make something happen. And I was encouraged this morning as I walked around and talked with people to see so many people focused on wanting to do something rather than just sitting and crying or feeling sad. And you have the right to do that. But if it isn't directly affecting you, you have to ask yourself why you're doing that. You could say, because I have so much compassion, and I'll buy that for a period of time, but if it lasts 2 or 3 or 4 or 5 or 10 days, then you better do this the rest of your life, because there are plenty of people you could have that same caring for. I believe that caring needs to be reflected in action, and the way that action can happen is an empowering meaning. If I think you're indulging, I'm going to keep asking you what needs you're meeting by doing this. If you're taking action, you'll have my total support, because I think anything we can do. So one of the things we can do, a couple of things we can do. Number one is there's going to be a major need for blood. And so I'm arranging to make a blood drive here at this person's program. So we're going to arrange to have them come here and be able to take our blood for any of those who want to donate your blood. That is a real resource. That's a real contribution. And by the way, it'd be better to be in a positive state because it affects your blood. We're going to change the entire format of this day, and we're going to use this as a phenomenal tool for emotional mastery. But let's first think about the people that need our direct help instead of ourselves. That'd be the families, people here that may not even know how their families are doing. That'd be the workers that are out there right now trying to save people who are giving their heart and soul. It'd be anyone who's dealing with this crisis who needs additional strength. Send love and send light and send prayers to them in whatever way it makes sense to you. And let's do that for a moment of silence for 1 minute. Here we go.
Many people at the conference felt that the intense destruction in New York deserved an equally intense emotional response on their own part. Others felt numb and worried that their reaction wasn't intense enough. Some were secretly pleased and excited. Many had been awake and upset since 3 a.m. and now felt demoralized and emotionally exhausted. In order to restore their emotional resources, Robbins will guide the group through an intense emotional experience of gratitude, appreciation, and the possibility of a new empowering vision which all could share.
It's usually after great pain that people begin to make new choices or begin to appreciate things they've begun to take for granted, like basic freedoms. This can truly serve. It's up to us whether it does or not. You must create a vision of something greater. See it as it is, then see it better than it is. Then make it the way you now see it. That's what a leader does. They create a vision for more. Think about all the people that right now that are laughing, and if you could absorb all their laughter in your body. All over the earth, there are people laughing right now. All over this world right now, there are people kissing. Right now. All over this world, absorb all their kisses. If you're going to absorb all the pain, you better take up all of humanity's love too, because otherwise you're not picking a balance. Because a real leader is here to serve, not their own needs, but the greater good, and in so doing, their needs are met as well. You can't give strength to someone else unless you have it inside you. You can't give love to someone else unless you've given it to yourself, and you sure can't create an exciting life if the only time you can be excited is when there are no problems. Because if you're waiting for a time when there are no problems, and there's no pain, and there's no tragedy, and there's no injustice before you celebrate, then you're never going to celebrate again as long as you live, or you're going to have to focus only on a very small part of the world. Don't be selective in your caring. Don't be selective in your pain. Create gratitude now. From that place, there'll be more of you to give. If you look for the good, it's always there. What's wrong is always available, whether you show it on the news or not. And so is what's right. Right now, there are children being born into a world where they will be loved. Right now, there are people being saved in hospitals all across this country. Right now, there are lives being turned around by people who care.